All right, so I want to show you guys how to do something called simplifying a square root. Um, you may use this in geometry. It depends on if you have me for geometry or not. Sometimes when you take the square root of a number, it's a little bit nicer to have something that isn't an ugly decimal, something you don't have to round, something to have an answer that isn't an approximation. It is an exact answer. Okay. This really isn't a big, hard math concept. You just kind of have you have to know how to look at it. So, square root of 36, that is a perfect square. It should be relatively easy if you've got your square root table or not. You should know what the square root of 36 is. Now, we've talked about square roots having two answers, right? I've got the positive and the negative value of the square root of 36. So I got positive and negative 6 on this. The reason why you get two answers, if you take positive 6 and you multiply it by itself, you get the number that was under the root. Okay, same thing here. I take negative 6 and I multiply it by negative 6. If I square it, I get, again, the number that was under the root. Now, I want to stop for just a second, and I want you to kind of look at 36 a little bit differently. Instead of us just saying, oh, that's 6 times 6, so that's the square root, I want to split this thing up. Instead of 36, I'm going to bust it up into 9 times 4. Now, the reason I picked 9 and 4, first of all, they multiply to 36, and they're both perfect squares. So I can split this up into the square root of 9 times the square root of 4. Each of those being a perfect square, so the square root of 9 is 3, the square root of 4 is 2, and I still get 6 out of this. Okay, so what I want you to be able to do is take these numbers that are under the root and split them up. Now, ideally, it would be nice if everything split up into a perfect square and a perfect square. That's not always going to be the case. We're looking to split these things up where one of the numbers that I grab is a perfect square and the other one is just the leftover junk. Okay, so if I did something like 18, okay, I want to split up 18 into two numbers that multiply together to give me 18, but I want one of them to be a perfect square. So off the top of my head, to get 18, this is a lot like when we factored. 1 times 18, that doesn't help. 2 times 9, that's a good one. 3 times 6, that's a good one too. But when I do 3 times 6, neither of those is a perfect square. So I'm going to split this up into 9 times 2. When I do that, the 9, I can actually simplify that because it's a perfect square. It's positive and negative 3. And then the square root of 2 just kind of tags along as part of the answer. So the square root of 18, when I simplify it, is positive and negative. Don't forget your positive and negatives. 3 square root of 2. Okay? These are what your answers are going to look like if what's underneath your radical up here wasn't a perfect square. So we're just going to do a handful of these. This is the rule that we're using. I don't know if there's actually a name for it, but the goal is to split your number up into two smaller numbers multiplied together, and I want the one out front to be a perfect square. Okay? If you put a number under this root that is not a perfect square, stop, back up, try to find a different pair of numbers. All right, so 75. Off the top of my head, I know that's 25 times 3. Okay, 25 is the perfect square. Look for perfect squares on these. Don't just throw any number in there. 5 times 15 is 75 too, but neither one of those is a perfect square. So I split this up into positive negative 5 root 3. 200, that's 100 times 2, so 10 root 2. I already did 18. We'll skip that one. 175. I'm holding off on that 192 because I don't know what it is off the top of my head. 175 is 25 times 7. So that is 5 square root 7. Don't forget the plus minus. The sun's bouncing off of a windshield and blinding me. 150. That's 25 times 6. So that one is 5 square root 6. I forgot my plus minus. All right, 192. I don't know what the square root of 192 is. I don't know a perfect square that divides into 192. So I'm going to grab my calculator and I'm going to start guessing and checking. So 192 divided by 16. That works. That's 12, 16 times 12. But I want to see if 16 works. Let's try 64. That is 64 times 3. Okay, so square root of 64 is positive negative 8 root 3. If you notice, not always, but usually, what's left in under your root is a nice small prime number, generally less than 10. 6 isn't a prime number, but it's still a pretty small number. So you're taking this big hot mess of a number and kind of getting it pretty simplified.